The moment I stepped through that peachwood door, I knew I was standing before two possibilities, either the best decision of my life or the worst mistake I would ever make. Beatrice Fairmont's face tightened into a strained smile, the kind you see when someone has just bitten into a sour lemon but is still trying to remain polite. Her eyes slowly swept over me from head to toe, the simple navy blue dress, the plain flat shoes, the earrings bought at the neighborhood grocery store. I didn't need to read her mind to know what she was doing. She was calculating. And her conclusion came quickly. I wasn't worth a single dollar. Beatrice leaned toward her son, Rowan, my fiancé, and whispered something she thought I couldn't hear. But I heard every word clearly. She said I looked like a maid who had entered through the wrong door. And in that very moment, I knew this dinner was going to be very, very interesting. My name is Sadie Calloway. I am 32 years old, and I have a secret to confess. For the past 14 months, I have been hiding something from the man I intend to marry. Not a small secret, like eating the last slice of pizza and blaming the dog. Not even a medium-sized secret, like still sleeping with a childhood stuffed animal. No, my secret is this. I earn $37,000 a month. Before taxes, the number is even more outrageous. After taxes, it is still the kind of number that makes accountants look twice and ask, is this correct? I am a senior software architect at one of the largest tech corporations in the Pacific Northwest. I have been writing code since I was 15, sold my first app at 22, and have been climbing higher and higher in my career ever since. I hold 3 patents. I have spoken at international conferences. I own company shares worth enough to make people's eyes sting just looking at the figures. And Rowan thinks I'm just an administrative assistant, a woman barely scraping by from month to month. I never actually lied to him. When we met at a coffee shop 14 months ago, he asked what I did for a living. I answered, I work in tech. He nodded as if that explained everything, then followed up. So you manage schedules for executives? I smiled and said something vague about supporting technical teams. He filled in the blanks himself, and I never corrected him. Why did I do that? Why did I let the man I was dating, the man I was falling in love with, believe I was struggling financially when I could have bought his car 10 times over? Because I learned a lesson very early in life from the most important person I ever knew, my grandmother. She raised me after my parents died when I was 7. A car accident. One second they were there, the next they were gone. I still remember the day the police knocked on her door, the serious faces, the lowered voices. I remember her kneeling in front of me, holding me tightly, and saying through trembling breath, "You will stay with me. I will take care of you." And she did. She lived in a small, lovely house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, 2 bedrooms. A backyard garden where she grew tomatoes and roses. She drove a 1998 beige Toyota Camry with a long scratch down the front door. She shopped at regular grocery stores, clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, and never wore anything flashy or showy. She taught me to cook simple meals: ground beef, mashed potatoes, fried chicken. She taught me to cherish small joys, a morning cup of tea, birdsong outside the window, the smell of fresh-baked bread. And she taught me this most important lesson of all. Never measure your worth by the balance in your bank account. I didn't know, until she passed away when I was 24, that my grandmother was actually worth millions of dollars. She had built a small business empire from a young age, starting with a laundromat, then expanding into a chain, then into real estate. She invested wisely, knew when to buy and when to sell. And she chose to live simply, not because she lacked money, but because she believed people mattered more than appearances. When she died, she left everything to me. The small house, the old Camry, and an investment portfolio that made the lawyer reading the will pause mid-sentence to ask whether I truly understood the numbers involved. And there was one more thing, a handwritten letter, a letter I still keep in the nightstand drawer. In it, she wrote, "My beloved granddaughter, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer by your side. But I want you to remember the most important truth I learned in my life. A person's true nature reveals itself when they believe no one important is watching. When they think you have nothing to offer them, when they believe you are beneath them, that is when you see who they really are. I lived simply not because I lacked money. I lived that way because I wanted to know who loved me for who I was, not for what I had. And the best people in my life, true friends, kind neighbors, and your grandfather, never cared how much money I had. They cared about my heart. Money is a tool, not a purpose. Use it wisely, live simply, and never allow anyone to make you feel small just because they do not know your true worth. You are always my treasure, whether rich or poor, forever yours, Grandmother. I cried the first time I read that letter. I cried the second time, the third time, the 10th time. And every time I read it again, I understood her lesson more deeply. So when Rowan invited me to dinner at his family estate in Medina, one of the most discreet, wealthy enclaves in America, where tech billionaires hide behind tall gates, when he suggested this might be the night things became serious, when he mentioned that his mother was very particular about first impressions, I made a decision. I would give the Fairmont family the test my grandmother had taught me. But before I tell you about that fateful dinner, I need to explain how the idea truly took shape. Rowan and I met at Slate Coffee Roasters on Capitol Hill. I was sitting with my laptop, wrestling with a complex piece of code for a new project. He approached and asked if he could share my table since the cafe was crowded. I nodded without looking up from the screen. He smiled. "Urgent work?" "Always," I replied. "In this industry, if you don't solve problems, they multiply tenfold." "What industry?" "Tech." He nodded, and I saw it clearly in that moment, a conclusion being formed. "Microsoft or Amazon?" "Close," I answered vaguely. "Assistant or HR?" I stopped typing and looked at him properly for the first time. He was classically handsome, wavy brown hair, blue eyes, a confident smile, white dress shirt, navy trousers, an expensive watch, polished leather shoes. "I support technical teams," I said. Not a lie. "That's great," he said, still friendly, but I already knew. He had categorized me. We talked for a few more minutes. He worked in marketing for a consulting firm. He liked hiking, sushi, Marvel movies. I laughed at the right moments, nodded at the right places. And when he asked for my number, I gave it to him. Why? Maybe because he was pleasant, maybe because I was lonely, or maybe because I was curious. If he thought I was just a regular assistant, how would he treat me? The first few months were lovely. Rowan was attentive. He remembered I liked oat milk lattes, opened doors for me, asked about my workday, listened, or at least pretended to, when I talked about deadlines and bugs. Then the small details started to surface. When I suggested dinner at Canlis, one of Seattle's most expensive restaurants, he hesitated. "Maybe for a special occasion," he said. "I don't want you to feel pressured by the prices." I told him I would pay. He looked surprised. We went. He ordered the most expensive dish. When the bill came, I paid. He said nothing. Or the time my car, my 2012 Subaru Outback, broke down on the road. Rowan picked me up in his brand-new BMW 5 Series. "You should get a new car," he said. "This one isn't safe." "It's fine. If you need to borrow money, I can help." "I know. With your salary, it's probably tight." "How much do you think I make?" "About 40, 45 a year." I made that in less than 2 months. Then there was my apartment, a small studio in Fremont. IKEA furniture. Rowan never asked why I lived there. He even said once, "When we get married, you'll get to move into my place." The way he emphasized the word "get" stayed with me. 4 months later, he started mentioning his family more often. Beatrice, Alton, Helena. They lived in Medina. "They're very important to me," Rowan said. "They have high standards." "Do you think they'll like me?" I asked. He was silent for too long. "They will," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. 2 months later, he invited me to dinner. "My mom is very picky about first impressions. What should I wear?" "Something nice," he said, then added, "Don't feel pressured to buy anything new. I know money's a bit tight." And that was when I decided. I would arrive exactly as they expected. A modest assistant, someone who didn't belong in their world. I would observe. Observe how they treated someone they believed beneath them. Observe whether Rowan would stand by my side. Observe their true nature when they thought they didn't need to pretend. That evening, I stood before my wardrobe in the penthouse in downtown Seattle, the one no one but me knew I owned. On one side, Armani, Prada, Burberry. On the other, Gap jeans, Target sweaters, simple cotton dresses. I chose the right side, navy blue dress, Payless flats. Thin cardigan. My only jewelry was my grandmother's small gold earrings, the only talisman I carried with me. I drove my old Subaru to Medina, through the security gate, past the guard's surprised look, down the long road leading to the Fairmont estate, and then I stood before that peachwood door. Rowan opened it. He was tense. He looked at me and felt ashamed. Observation number 1. Inside, everything was lavishly cold. Reproduction art, crystal chandeliers, windows overlooking Lake Washington. And then I saw them. Beatrice, Alton, Helena. Observation number 2. Observation number 3. And then, Victor Langridge. He looked at me. He heard my name. He heard my grandmother's name. And his expression changed. This was the variable I had not anticipated. If you think this was just an uncomfortable dinner, you're wrong. Because in the next part, polite questions will turn into a refined interrogation, and Rowan's silence will speak louder than any words ever could. The Fairmont family dining room looked like it had stepped straight out of a film about the elite. A table long enough for 16 people, made of walnut polished so thoroughly that the chandelier's light reflected off the surface like a mirror. Cream silk upholstered chairs that, at a glance, you could tell each one cost more than an average person's monthly rent. Above us, a massive crystal chandelier glowed, its light refracting into countless shimmering streaks that danced across the walls. But what made me stop wasn't the table, the chairs, or the chandelier. It was the place setting. Each seat had 6 forks. 6. I had eaten at 3 Michelin star restaurants, and even they rarely laid things out to this extent. In front of me were 5 different spoons, 4 knives, and 3 crystal glasses for 3 different kinds of drinks. Beatrice noticed me looking. The corner of her mouth curled up, a smile like a cat watching a mouse step neatly into a trap it had already set. "Are you familiar with formal dining, Saad?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey, but cold as stone. I smiled lightly, not rushing to lower my head, and not rushing to tense up either. "My grandmother always taught me," I replied, "that it's not the number of forks that makes the meal, but the people you share the table with that matter." For a second, Beatrice seemed to freeze. My answer was humble enough not to be taken as a challenge, but sharp enough that I didn't look like a lost girl. Helena snorted behind her wineglass. Alton looked like he was trying not to laugh. And Victor Langridge, that mysterious man, watched me with amused eyes, as if he had just witnessed a clever counterpunch he hadn't expected. We took our seats. I was placed between Rowan and Alton, facing Beatrice and Helena. Victor sat at the far end of the table, occasionally glancing toward me, his curiosity completely unhidden. A maid, a middle-aged woman in a crisp black and white uniform, carried out the appetizer, a soup I didn't recognize, served in a spotless white bowl, topped with a swirl of cream and a few decorative herbs positioned as if they, too, had been trained to stand exactly where they were told. "This is chestnut soup with white truffle and roasted hazelnut oil," Beatrice announced, as though she were introducing a work of art. "Our private chef prepared it especially for tonight." I lifted a spoonful. The soup was delicious. Of course it was, with ingredients like that. But inside, I found myself thinking of the simple potato soup my grandmother used to make on winter nights. No truffle, no fancy hazelnut oil, just warmth and love, something no amount of money could buy. And exactly as I expected, Beatrice began her interrogation as soon as we started eating. "So, Sade, where did you grow up?" "In Seattle, ma'am, in Capitol Hill." "Capitol Hill," Beatrice repeated, drawing the words out with pointed meaning. Capitol Hill used to be a poor neighborhood before gentrification turned it expensive. The way she said those two words was like she had just touched something unclean. "And your family?" "My parents died when I was little. My grandmother raised me." "Oh." Beatrice let out a sigh of feigned sympathy. How sad. Growing up without proper guidance must have been very difficult. I felt anger spike, sharp and sudden, but I put it out before it could show on my face. "My grandmother gave me all the guidance I needed, ma'am," I replied. Of course, Beatrice said quickly, but her tone made it clear she didn't truly believe it. "And what did your grandmother do for work?" "She was a businesswoman." Helena leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with a kind of poisonous curiosity. "What kind of businesswoman?" "She had a few small businesses," I said, keeping my voice even. "Nothing too impressive. The truth was, my grandmother once owned a laundromat chain that grew into a major services company, and she sold it for $8 million in 2005. But that was not information I would be sharing tonight." "I see," Helena said lightly, as if she had just confirmed that I was nobody. Then she turned to her mother and launched into chatter about some charity event, cutting me out of the conversation completely. Rowan sat beside me, staring down at his bowl, silent. Observation number 4. Rowan wasn't just failing to defend me. He was participating in that silence. Alton, sitting on my other side, tried to pull back a thread of courtesy. "What do you enjoy outside of work, Sade?" "I like reading and hiking when I have time." "Hiking!" Helena cut in, her voice as if I'd said I liked picking up trash. "How adorable! Like a little Girl Scout." Victor, silent until then, suddenly spoke. "I think hiking is a wonderful hobby," he said calmly. "My grandmother used to say the happiest people are the ones who know how to appreciate the simple things in life." Beatrice shot Victor a displeased look. Victor ignored her and kept his eyes on me. "Your grandmother's name was Margaret Calloway, wasn't it?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "I believe I met her once," Victor said slowly. "Many years ago, at an entrepreneurs' conference in Portland. She spoke about sustainable management and business ethics." I was slightly surprised. That was entirely possible. My grandmother had attended many conferences in her later years. "I didn't know much about her work when she was young," I admitted. "She didn't like talking about it." "A humble woman," Victor nodded. "Rare these days." Beatrice watched the exchange between Victor and me, irritation now visible. "Victor, the next course is coming," she cut in, her tone sharper. "We shouldn't let the soup get cold." The air dropped into a kind of tight, stringed silence. If you're listening to this and feeling like you can't breathe on my behalf, believe me, this dinner was only the beginning. In families like the Fairmonts, they don't need to shout. All they need is the right sentence in the right place, the right smile at the right time, and one information that sounds accidental, and they can turn you into an unnecessary extra. And I began to realize they weren't just testing me, they were staging something. But I still didn't know what they were staging, not until Helena dropped the real bomb. The main course arrived: Wagyu steak with lobster, truffle potatoes, roasted asparagus. It looked like a painting, but the portion was so small I was certain that if I got home late, I would still need to eat something afterward. Helena poured herself more wine, her third or fourth glass, I wasn't counting, and then said suddenly, as if casually, "Mom, I ran into Alexandra last week." The room went instantly silent. A very specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when someone has just touched a subject everyone knows, but no one wants to name. I looked at Rowan. He stopped cutting his meat. His knife hung frozen in midair. His face turned pale. "Alexandra?" Beatrice asked, her voice calm in a way that felt suspicious. "How is she?" "She's amazing," Helena said, with an enthusiasm that looked rehearsed. She looked radiant. "Her family company is thriving. They just signed a new import contract with a German car manufacturer." "How wonderful," Beatrice said. Then her eyes flicked quickly to me to check my reaction. "Alexandra has always been an exceptional girl." I kept eating, my expression steady. I didn't ask questions. I didn't look curious. I waited, because I knew they wouldn't stop there, and I was right. Sadie doesn't know about Alexandra, does she? Helena said, her voice like honey mixed with poison. She was Rowan's ex. They dated for 3 years. All of us thought they would get married. I set my fork down very slowly and looked at Rowan. You never mentioned her. Rowan swallowed. Babe, that's in the past. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter? Helena gave a dry laugh. Rowan, it was 3 years. And both families were very close. Beatrice continued, her voice sweet but dangerous. Alexandra's family owns Castellano Imports, one of the largest luxury car import companies on the West Coast. They specialize in European brands like Porsche, BMW, Mercedes, Audi. Such a shame the two of them broke up. It should have been a perfect match. A perfect business match, Victor cut in, his voice cool. But not a perfect emotional one, was it, Beatrice? Beatrice shot Victor a warning look. Victor only sipped his wine as if he had stated something obvious. I looked around the dining room, and for the first time I truly noticed the framed photos on the wall and the display cabinets. One large photo, the Fairmont family at an outdoor party. Rowan stood beside a strikingly beautiful woman with long black hair, olive-toned skin, wearing a red evening gown. Her arm was wrapped around his waist. Both of them were smiling. Another Christmas. Rowan and that woman stood in front of the tree holding champagne flutes. She wore a large diamond necklace. Another, summer by the lake. Rowan and her on a sailboat. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Alexandra, 4, maybe 5, photos of her in this room. Beatrice caught my gaze. Satisfaction spread across her face, as if she had just placed a chess piece exactly where she wanted it. Beautiful pictures, aren't they? She asked. We treasure family memories. Alexandra is like a daughter to us. In fact, she still visits sometimes. Helena twisted the knife deeper. Alexandra is still single. So surprising. A woman that beautiful and successful. It's almost like she's waiting for someone. She looked at Rowan with a smile heavy with implication. Something in my stomach tightened. Not quite jealousy, not yet. It was recognition. This wasn't coincidence. This was intent. They were showing me exactly where I stood in this house. I looked at Rowan. Do you still keep in touch with her? Rowan hesitated for too long. We talk sometimes, because our families are close. I see, I said gently, as if I were simply acknowledging a fact. But inside my head the gears had already started turning. Rowan still spoke to his ex. His family didn't just like her, they treated her as family. Her photos hung all over the room, and Beatrice emphasized the phrase perfect match like it was a contract. Something was wrong, something bigger than a difficult future mother-in-law. Beatrice pulled me out of my thoughts with a question that sounded harmless. Sede, Rowan said you work in tech. You're a secretary, aren't you? I have a support role, I replied. How wonderful, Beatrice said, in a tone that contained no wonder at all. Every team needs administrative support. It's very important work. The way she stressed the word important sounded like she was talking about something that had to exist, but didn't deserve to be looked at directly. Helena giggled. How much do you make at that job, if you don't mind? Helena, Alton finally spoke, his voice heavy. That's not a polite question. What? Helena played innocent. We're going to be family. Family has no secrets. I smiled. I get by. I'm sure you do, Beatrice said. Then she added, sweetly but venomously, I hope you don't feel too out of place in our world. We understand not everyone is born with certain advantages. Some people have to live an ordinary life. There's nothing shameful about being ordinary. Ordinary. She had labeled me ordinary the way you'd slap a sticker onto something. I set my water glass down slowly. How do you define ordinary? I asked. Beatrice's smile widened, showing teeth. Oh, you know, nothing remarkable, nothing special, just average. The air in the room dropped straight to the floor. Even Helena looked slightly stunned by how openly cruel it was. I turned to Rowan. I waited for him to say something, anything, just for him to stand on my side, even once. Rowan opened his mouth. Mom didn't mean it like that, Saad. Mom just wants to protect me. Protect him, not protect me. Of course, I said softly, keeping my voice even. A mother always wants what's best for her son. I left the rest unsaid. And I'm not what she considers best. Victor set his utensils down. The metal against porcelain rang out clearly. Beatrice, I think you're going too far. Sade is a guest in this house. Victor, don't interfere in family matters, Beatrice said coldly. I'm only reminding you of basic courtesy, Victor replied. Then he turned to me. Sade, don't let improper remarks upset you. People think money and status create character. But in my experience, the opposite is true. Beatrice stood abruptly, as if to seize control of the atmosphere. We should take a break before dessert. Gentlemen, to the sitting room for drinks. Helena and I will check on dessert with the chef. Sade, if you'd like to use the restroom, it's at the end of the hallway on the left. That wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Go somewhere else. We need to talk without you. I left the table and walked in the direction Beatrice indicated. The hallway was long, lined with expensive paintings and mirrors. The restroom was easy to find. Large, marble sink, oversized mirror, and even a small sofa in the corner. I turned on the cold water, splashed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The face looking back at me wasn't broken. Not shattered. I wasn't crying. I wasn't furious in a reckless way. I was calculating. What I had just witnessed, the contempt, Alexandra's photos, Rowan's failure to defend me, and the phrase perfect business match, was not accidental. This wasn't just a picky family. This was something systematic, planned. I needed to know more. I didn't go back right away. I walked slowly down the hallway, like someone who had wandered by mistake, and then I heard voices. Beatrice and Helena. From a room at the end of the corridor, the door slightly ajar. Every instinct told me to keep walking. This was eavesdropping. This was intrusion. This was something decent people didn't do. But my grandmother's voice rang in my head. A person's true nature shows when they think no one important is listening. I stepped quietly closer, stood in the shadows, listened. We need to handle this quickly, Beatrice said, her voice tight and urgent. Rowan can't make this mistake. I know, Helena replied. I can't believe he actually brought her here. I thought this was just a phase, like when he tried to go vegan in college. No, this is more serious than a diet, Beatrice exhaled sharply. That woman could ruin everything. My heart beat faster. They were talking about me. The timing couldn't be worse, Helena said. We need the deal with the Castellanos, and for that to happen, Rowan has to be with Alexandra. I went rigid. I know, Beatrice sighed. The entire plan depends on it. The company is in trouble. Alton won't say it, but I know. We need capital from the Castellanos, and they will only invest if the two families are linked. Linked through marriage, Helena said plainly. My throat went dry. The Fairmonts are in financial trouble. They need the Castellanos to survive, and the condition is Rowan marrying Alexandra. Rowan promised me he was keeping things open with Alexandra, Beatrice continued. That was the plan. He keeps this little secretary as temporary while we finalize details with the Castellanos, but he's getting too attached. Temporary. I was just a placeholder, a substitute until they got what they wanted. He's an idiot, Helena laughed with contempt. He actually seems to like her. A plain little nobody. He should have used her as a distraction until he secured Alexandra, but instead he's getting attached. We will deal with it, Beatrice said, her voice hard. Tonight we'll announce the engagement, force him into a public commitment. Then we'll find a way to break it off before the wedding. Once Alexandra is secured, we'll discover some terrible secret about her, make it up if we have to justify ending it. And if she doesn't walk away easily? She will, Beatrice said with certainty. Women like her, poor, no family, no money, they know when to accept defeat. If we need to, we'll offer her a small amount. $50,000 probably looks like a fortune to someone like her. Helena laughed. At least she's too stupid to suspect anything. Rowan chose well in that sense. She's naive, trusting, probably just grateful Rowan even looked at her. I backed away from the door very slowly, afraid the floor might creak. My hands were shaking, but not from heartbreak, from rage. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was naive. They thought I was so desperate I would swallow anything. And the worst part was, Rowan knew. Rowan wasn't a weak man trapped between me and his family. Rowan was part of the plan. I returned to the restroom, closed the door, and sat down on the sofa. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. I came here to test the Fairmont family, to see how they would treat me when they believed I had nothing. They didn't just fail. They revealed the one thing they were hiding most carefully. The question now was, what would I do with this truth? I could walk out immediately, expose everything, and leave forever. But if I did, they would call me dramatic, oversensitive, an ambitious poor girl. No. If I answered this betrayal, I would do it my way, on my terms, with a plan they would never see coming. My grandmother taught me something that I understand more with every year. When someone underestimates you, they have just given you a gift, the gift of surprise. Beatrice and Helena had just given me the biggest gift of all. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I could do. They didn't know what I was capable of. I touched up my makeup, smoothed my hair, looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman looking back at me was different now. No longer the girl anxious to be accepted. No longer the fiancé hoping to be loved correctly. This was Sade Calloway, a senior software architect, an heir to a multi-million-dollar legacy, a woman who built her career from zero and who didn't need anyone's approval. And I was going to teach the Fairmont family a lesson they would never forget. I walked back with a smile. When I entered, the atmosphere had changed. Everyone had moved into the formal sitting room, classic decor, softer lighting, but still carrying the chill of class. Rowan stood near the fireplace, looking nervous. When he saw me, he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Beatrice and Helena stood close together, whispering. The moment I walked in, they fell silent, turned, and put on their fake smiles like masks being swapped. Alton and Victor stood by the window with brandy. Victor still watched me with a thoughtful gaze. "Sade," Rowan hurried over. "You were gone a long time. I was about to come look for you." "Sorry," I said softly. "I just needed a little air. This house is so beautiful. I got carried away." "Yes." Beatrice stepped into the center of the room. "This house has been in the Fairmont family for 3 generations. We're very proud of our legacy." Legacy. Tradition. Bloodline. Those words always carried an unspoken meaning. We have it. You don't. "You must be very fortunate," I said to Beatrice, "to grow up in an environment like that." Beatrice smiled, thinking I was praising her. She didn't hear the needle of sarcasm hidden beneath velvet. "We are blessed," she said, "and we try to share that blessing. That's why I wanted to speak with you, Sade." Here it was, the moment they had scheduled. Beatrice gestured to Rowan. He stepped beside me, more tense than ever. "Sade," Rowan began, his voice trembling. "I know we haven't been dating long, but I know what I want." "I want you." He dropped to one knee. The room went silent. Helena tried to keep her face neutral, but the corners of her mouth still seemed to lift. Beatrice stood rigid as a statue, her eyes bright with something that looked like victory. Rowan pulled out a small box. Opened it. The ring wasn't impressive. The center diamond was fairly large, but cloudy, not clear. I could see inclusions even from this distance. The white gold band was thin, uneven in places. The kind of ring that looks luxurious in dim light, but under daylight reveals all its flaws, like the man holding it. "Sade Calloway," Rowan said, and I heard the performance in it. He was reading a script. "I know we come from different worlds. I know my family can be overwhelming, but I think that's exactly why we're perfect. You make me a better version of myself. Will you marry me?" I looked down at Rowan, the man I once thought was my future. the man I once imagined building a life with. Now, I saw him for what he was: weak, dishonest, and controlled by a toxic family that treated him like a chess piece. I could say no, I could end it right here, but that would be too fast. Too easy. I thought of my grandmother, of the lesson she left behind, and I thought of Beatrice and Helena somewhere inside this room, convinced that $50,000 would make me quiet and disappear. They underestimated me. And I was going to use that. I smiled. Tears rose, easy to summon when I thought of betrayal. "Yes," I said. "I will marry you." Rowan stood and slid the ring onto my finger. It was slightly loose, another detail proving he didn't truly know me at all. He kissed me, and I let him, keeping the smile on my lips. Beatrice began clapping. "Congratulations! This is wonderful news!" Helena clapped too, her smile cold. Alton shook Rowan's hand, looking relieved more than happy. Victor stepped forward last. He reached out to congratulate me, but when our eyes met, I saw something else there. Understanding, or warning. "Congratulations, Miss Calloway," Victor said softly. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do," I replied, holding his gaze. "Perfectly clearly." The rest of the evening passed like a blurred dream. Champagne was poured. Dessert arrived, a complicated creation of chocolate and edible gold. Beatrice began talking about planning the engagement party. "We should hold it soon," she said. 3 weeks from now, invite all the important people in the business community. This is a major occasion. A major occasion. To bind Rowan to me in public, so that if everything collapsed later, they could turn me into the one who deserved the blame. "Sounds wonderful," I said, wearing my sweetest smile. When the night ended, Rowan walked me to my car. He held my hand, and the ring lay cold and hard between our palms. "I know my family can be difficult," Rowan said gently, "but they'll get used to you." "It just takes time." "I understand," I replied. "I know they only want what's best for you." Rowan looked genuinely relieved. "Exactly, that's all it is." He kissed me goodbye. I drove away from the Fairmont estate, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror. And for the first time all night, I let the mask fall. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't pound the steering wheel, I just drove and thought. They thought they had won, they thought they had put me in my place, but they didn't know. The game had only just begun. This time I knew the rules, I knew their plan. I knew their weak points. Beatrice and Helena had accidentally handed me everything I needed to break them. And I would, not just for revenge, though that part would certainly be very sweet, but because they needed to learn a lesson. People are not chess pieces. Love is not a tool, and underestimating someone by appearances is the most dangerous mistake you can make. My grandmother taught me, a person's true nature reveals itself when they think no one important is watching. The Fairmont family had just shown me their true nature. Now, it was my turn to show them mine. I couldn't sleep that night, not because I was heartbroken, but because my mind refused to be still. It ran like a machine, analyzing, connecting facts, testing scenarios, a chess match where every move had a price. At 5 a.m., I sat at my desk in my penthouse, my real home, the one Rowan had never set foot in. 3 monitors glowed cold in the darkness. My third cup of coffee had gone lukewarm, but I couldn't even taste the bitterness anymore. I wrote down what I knew, like lines of law. Fairmont was in financial trouble. They needed the deal with the Castellanos to survive. The deal depended on Rowan marrying Alexandra. And me? I was just temporary, a placeholder to keep Rowan busy while they finished the plan. But emotions wouldn't help me win. I needed details, numbers, proof. I started with corporate records. Fairmont Automotive Group was private, but it still had to file certain reports. I accessed the Washington State Business Database and searched like I was finding my way through a paper maze. The results confirmed every suspicion. Fairmont's revenue was down 23% over 2 years. They had closed 3 dealerships last year. Their debt had doubled, and there was a large loan coming due in 6 months, $4.2 million. They weren't just struggling. They were sinking. I shifted to Castellano Imports. Alexandra's family company was a different world altogether. Growth, profit, a national network. Exactly what Fairmont needed. Capital, connections, and credibility. But if Fairmont was weakening, why would Castellano want to partner with them? I dug deeper. Articles, press releases, court records. And then I found a lawsuit from 3 years ago. A supplier sued Fairmont for non-payment. The case was settled out of court, but the file still carried heavy allegations: fraud, false books, embezzlement. The plaintiff's representative name made me sit up straight. Victor Langridge. Victor, the man who had looked at me like he recognized something. The man who had stopped Beatrice with a single sentence. He had a history with the Fairmonts. And it wasn't a pretty one. I kept following the money like my grandmother taught me. If you want the truth, look at where the money goes. And I found something even clearer than I expected. Helena Fairmont, Rowan's sister, was the CFO, the one signing off on finances. In the publicly available expense reports, I saw inconsistencies, unusually high consulting fees, payments to unnamed independent contractors, travel expenses running into tens of thousands every month. And the common thread? Every approval carried Helena's signature. I opened Helena's social media. She wasn't hiding it. She flaunted it, like spending money was the only way to prove she existed. Paris, Milan, Monaco, Hermes bags, Cartier watches, a red Porsche Cayenne. I cross-checked the dates, and for the first time that night, I let out a very small smile, without any joy. Every time Helena posted a luxury purchase, a few days earlier, the company books would show a matching consulting or travel charge. Helena was embezzling. I printed everything, screenshotted everything, saved every line of data, built a digital folder like an armory. And when the folder was complete, I knew I now had something Beatrice and Helena would never imagine: leverage. In that moment, if you asked me whether I felt sad or angry, I would have said I was awake. Because when you realize you're being used like a chess piece, you don't cry anymore. You just want to know who is holding the board and who is paying for the game. This wasn't a love story. This was a transaction, and I had just opened its real file. The next day, I found Victor Langridge's number. Langridge Consulting had an office in downtown Seattle. I called, pretending to be a potential client. The assistant said he was busy and offered an appointment at the end of next month. I didn't dance around it. Please tell him Saad Calloway wants to speak with him about the Fairmont family. There was a beat of silence on the line. Please hold. Less than a minute later, Victor picked up, and Ms. Calloway, I was wondering when I would hear from you. You knew I would call? I recognized your grandmother's name at dinner, he replied. Margaret Calloway isn't a common name in Seattle's business circles, and the way you endured Beatrice's insults, it was enough for me to know you weren't who they thought you were. Can you meet me? Today. Zeitgeist, Capitol Hill. 2 p.m., I'll be in the back corner. At exactly 2, I walked into Zeitgeist, a small, dim cafe, not trendy, no Wi-Fi, no laptops, just people drinking coffee and having real conversations. Victor was where he said he'd be, in a simple gray suit, reading a paper newspaper. I set my leather folder on the table. You knew something. At dinner. Victor nodded. He spoke about my grandmother, someone he respected for integrity, fairness, and never cheating partners. And he said it plainly. When he heard her name, when he watched me hold my ground against Beatrice, he knew I was playing a different game. A game whose rules I now know, I replied. I overheard the plan. I know Fairmont is in trouble. I know about the Castellano deal, and I know I'm only temporary. Victor didn't look surprised. Beatrice has never been subtle. I held his gaze. You have a past with them. 15 years ago, Victor admitted. I partnered with Alton Fairmont. I put in capital, expertise, time. When there was profit, Alton found a way to push me out using small legal clauses. You sued them. I got my principal back, but no profit, no damages. Legally, it was right. Morally, it was betrayal. Then why are you still connected? Keep your enemies close, Victor said. I wanted to see the day their arrogance caught up with them. He looked straight at me. And now, that day has come. I slid the folder across the table. Victor flipped through the pages. His eyebrow lifted. Helena is embezzling, he concluded. Hundreds of thousands over years. Possibly more than 1 million if we reconcile everything. Victor let out a quiet laugh without humor. Putting the fox in charge of the hen house. I need more, I said. Details on the Castellano deal, the timeline, who's involved. Victor watched me for a long moment. If I help you, this stops being self-defense. This becomes taking them down. They deserve it. The Fairmonts have connections. They fight dirty. So do I said softly. Are you in or not? Victor was silent for a few seconds, then he extended his hand. I'm in. I've been waiting for this opportunity for 15 years. We shook hands, and the alliance was formed. A week later, I told Rowan I had to work late. He looked regretful, or pretended to. I also have a meeting tonight. It might run long. I knew he was lying. Victor tracked Rowan's reservation. He had booked a table at Canlis, the most expensive restaurant in Seattle, under his name, for 2. That night, I arrived at Canlis at 7:30. I didn't go in. I simply parked where I could clearly see the entrance and waited. At 7:45, Rowan's Mercedes arrived. He stepped out in a dark suit, more polished than usual, and waited by the door. At 8, a white Tesla Model S pulled up. Alexandra Castellano stepped out. Tall, slender, long, glossy black hair, olive-toned skin, a fitted red dress, black heels, a Chanel clutch. She saw Rowan and smiled a familiar smile. Rowan walked toward her. They hugged, not politely, but intimately and long. Rowan's arm wrapped around her waist like an old habit that had never disappeared. They went inside. I took photos. 1, 2, 3, enough to leave no room for denial. I could have stormed in and made a scene. But that wasn't the plan. I kept waiting. An hour and a half later, they came out. Rowan touched Alexandra's cheek lightly. She laughed, said something that made him laugh. Then Rowan took her hand. Click, click, click. They stood for a few more minutes, holding hands and talking. Alexandra got into her car and drove away. Rowan stayed there watching for a long time. I went home, uploaded the photos, and added them to the ever-thickening evidence folder. That night, Rowan texted, "The meeting ran long. I'm getting home late. I love you." I stared at the message, then at the photos, and I felt the last remaining piece of affection I had for Rowan Fairmont die. No pain, just cold. No. Clear. I replied, "It's okay, love. I understand. I love you too." The last lie I would ever give him. From now on, everything would be truth. And the truth would destroy them. The next 3 weeks were the harshest 3 weeks of my life. Not because of heartbreak. That feeling had passed long ago, replaced by something colder and sharper. The hardest part was that I had to perform, every day, every hour. And in the most private moments of all, every time Rowan touched me, kissed me, told me he loved me, I had to smile as if I still believed, as if I were still naive enough not to realize I was being led by a string. We met the Fairmont family every week. Sunday dinner at the Medina estate became a ritual. Beatrice sat at the head of the table like a queen, directing every detail of the engagement party. Helena scattered her poisonous remarks, wrapped in shiny paper labeled concern. Alton remained silent, observing everything with the tired eyes of a man who had grown used to surrender. And me? I nodded. I agreed. I played my role as the soft, perfect, naive bride, the kind Beatrice liked best, easy to control. "Sade, what do you think about blush pink for the flowers?" Beatrice asked. "It's beautiful, ma'am." "And should we hire a string quartet or a jazz band?" "Whatever you think is appropriate, ma'am." I watched Beatrice and Helena exchange a glance. Quick, but clear enough. They were pleased. I was walking exactly the path they had drawn, compliant, no opinions, no resistance. Perfect. While they soothed their egos in Medina, Victor and I met in the shadows of the plan. We met in secret, each time at a different cafe, never the same place twice, leaving no trail. And every time, I brought more evidence. Helena moved $47,000 last week, I said at one meeting. It's labeled marketing consulting, but I checked. No consulting company exists under that name. Victor took notes, calm to the point of chilling. We're almost at the point where we can take this to investigators. Not yet, I said immediately. Not yet. He looked up at me. You want to wait for the engagement party? I want everyone there when it collapses, I replied. Everyone they're trying to impress, every business relationship they have. I want their ruin to happen publicly, completely, and irreversibly. Victor nodded slowly. You're terrifying, Miss Calloway, he said. Remind me never to underestimate you. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Too late for the Fairmonts to learn that lesson, I said. They already made that mistake. But there's something no one tells you about revenge. It isn't just planning, not just evidence, not just the day you strike. The hardest part is the tiny, ordinary moments when the betrayer looks you in the eye and asks, "Are you okay?" And you have to answer, "I'm fine." Not because you're weak, but because you're waiting for the right moment, for the truth to drop like a stone. There was one night I almost broke. 2 weeks before the engagement party, Rowan took me to a small romantic restaurant. Candles on the table, soft music, an atmosphere staged perfectly to soften your heart. You've seemed distant lately, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Did I do something wrong? I looked at him, the man I once loved, the man who lied to me every day. You didn't do anything wrong, I said. Are you sure? Rowan asked, his voice turning gentle like a soothing lullaby. If there's anything, if you're worried about my family, about the wedding, about anything, I want you to tell me. A part of me wanted to scream in his face, to flip the table, to pull out my phone and throw the pictures of him and Alexandra straight into those pretending eyes, but I swallowed it, took a breath. Remembered the plan. I'm just stressed about work, I said, and planning the party has been a bit overwhelming. You don't need to worry, Rowan said immediately, his voice gentle as if he were granting me a favor. My mom is handling everything. You just need to show up and look beautiful. Show up and look beautiful. No opinion, no voice, just an accessory. Okay, I smiled. That night, after Rowan dropped me off and drove away, I sat on the floor of my penthouse. And for the first time since the dinner in Medina, I cried. Not because of Rowan, but because of the version of me who once believed in this future. The girl who once thought love was enough, that she could find a man who loved her for who she was, not for what he thought she had or didn't have. I cried for that innocence because it was dead, and I knew I would never get it back. Then I wiped my tears, stood up, looked myself straight in the mirror. They'll pay, I told myself, for every lie, every manipulation, and every second they thought they could use people like chess pieces. That night I didn't sleep. I used the hours to finish the plan, every detail, every timeline, every move. A plan precise enough that once the first domino fell, the entire system would go down with it. The night before the engagement party, Rowan came to my studio apartment, the one he thought was my home. He brought wine and Thai takeout. We sat on the small sofa, eating pad Thai and drinking wine. Talking about trivial things. Rowan seemed anxious, tense in the way of someone who is afraid of losing what he wants and afraid of revealing what he's hiding. Are you happy? He asked suddenly. I looked at him. Why are you asking? Because everything is moving so fast, Rowan said, his voice lower. We've known each other less than a year and a half, and now we're engaged. My family can be overwhelming. I just want to be sure this is what you want. Here it was, the last chance for Rowan to tell the truth. To confess about Alexandra, about the plan, about how he had used me like a shadow. If he were honest in this moment, maybe, just maybe, I would consider forgiveness. Cancel the plan. Simply walk away and never look back. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" I asked gently. "Anything." Rowan looked straight into my eyes. In that look, I saw a brief struggle, something like guilt. Like conscience, like the truth trying to claw its way out. "Yes," he finally said. "There's something I want to say." My heart sped up. This is it. The truth. "I want you to know," Rowan said, squeezing my hands. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I know I'm not perfect. I know my family is difficult. But I love you. I really do, and I can't wait to marry you." Not the truth, just a lie delivered with sincerity. I stared at him, the man who had just been given a last chance to save whatever humanity he had left, and he chose to keep lying. "I love you too," I said. My last lie. Rowan kissed me, and in that kiss I felt nothing anymore. No love, no regret. Only one thing remained, resolve, cold as metal. When Rowan left, I called Victor. "It's time," I said. "Execute the plan." "Are you sure?" Victor asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back." "I'm more sure than I've ever been about anything in my life." "All right," Victor said. I heard typing on his end. "I've contacted the manufacturer. They'll be at the party. I sent the file anonymously to a business journalist. She'll come. And I've prepared the evidence on Helena. Everything is ready." "Perfect." "Sade," Victor said, his voice lowering. "Your grandmother would be proud." I swallowed. "I hope so." That night, I opened my real wardrobe. I ignored the right side, the ordinary clothes I wore around Rowan. I went straight to the left, the pieces I saved for a special night. I chose an emerald green dress. Ely Saab, custom made for me, worth as much as a brand new car. I chose jewelry, my grandmother's diamond pendant, appraised at $180,000, a Cartier bracelet. Harry Winston earrings, and a limited edition Patek Philippe watch, one of 50 in the world. I looked at myself in the mirror, not Sade poor the way they imagined, not the soft fiancé who always nodded, but the real Sade. Sade with power. Sade the Fairmont family never believed could exist. "Tomorrow," I said to my reflection, "tomorrow they'll find out. Who underestimated whom?" I smiled. And for the first time in 3 weeks, that smile was real. The Fairmont estate that night had been transformed into a perfect party paradise. Massive white tents covered the lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary metal frames, reflecting warm golden light. Blush roses were arranged everywhere. Flowers alone had cost at least $50,000. A string quartet played classical music beside the fountain. Beatrice Fairmont had spared no expense, not to celebrate love, but to impress, to build an image, to tell the world the Fairmont family was still powerful, still wealthy, still worthy of respect. She didn't know that. This was the night everything would collapse. I drove my old Subaru there, one last time. The valet looked at the car, then at me, clearly confused. "Ma'am, are you sure this is the right address?" "Absolutely," I smiled. I stepped out of the car. The emerald green Ely Saab dress caught the light of the setting sun. My grandmother's diamond pendant sparkled at my neck. The Patek Philippe watch weighed solidly on my wrist. My hair had been styled by one of Seattle's top stylists, soft waves falling naturally. My makeup was subtle, flawless, but never ostentatious. I looked like someone who belonged to a different world, because I did. The valet's mouth fell open. I'm sorry, I didn't—" "It's fine," I said gently, and walked straight ahead. Instantly, eyes turned toward me. About 100 guests were already present, all impeccably dressed, all wealthy, all important. Corporate executives, elite families, political figures, and all of them stopped to stare at me. A woman leaned over to whisper to her husband. A man pulled out his phone to check something. Waves of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beatrice stood near the entrance of the tent, greeting guests with her familiar social smile. When she saw me, her face went through a series of expressions she couldn't hide. Confusion, recognition, shock, and finally fear. "Said," she said, her voice catching. You look different," I offered, stopping in front of her. "Perhaps because I don't have to pretend anymore." Helena appeared beside her mother, eyes wide. "That dress? Is that Elisab?" "Couture," I replied calmly. "Custom made." I thought it suited the occasion. Alton stepped forward, staring at me like a stranger. Rowan followed him, and when he saw me, he froze mid-step. "Saad," he said, his voice faltering. What's going on?" I walked closer to him, smiling. "Hi, love." "I just decided to dress from my real wardrobe tonight." "Your real wardrobe?" "The one in my penthouse in downtown Seattle," I said clearly. "Where I actually live, not the studio apartment I showed you." Rowan's mouth fell open. Beatrice staggered. At the edge of the crowd, Victor gave a very slight nod. I turned to face the guests. "Everyone," I said, calm but loud enough to cut through the music, "it seems we need to talk." There are moments in life when a room is packed so tightly it feels suffocating, yet you can still hear your own heartbeat clearly. It's the moment you know, after the next sentence, none of them will be able to pretend anymore. Beatrice tried to regain control. "Sade, perhaps we should speak privately." "No," I cut in firmly. "I think everyone here should hear this, especially the Fairmont family's business partners." I scanned the crowd, recognizing familiar faces from my investigation, representatives from the car manufacturer, owners of competing dealerships, and a business journalist Victor had invited. "My name is Saad Calloway," I began, "and I've been keeping a secret for quite some time." I paused, letting the silence spread. "I'm not the poor administrative assistant the Fairmont family believed me to be. I'm a senior software architect, earning $37,000 a month. I hold 3 patents, and I inherited a multi-million-dollar estate from my grandmother, Margaret Calloway, one of Seattle's most respected entrepreneurs." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised. "Why did I hide that?" I continued. "Because my grandmother taught me a very simple lesson. People's true nature reveals itself when they think you have nothing to offer them." I turned to Beatrice, and the Fairmont family failed that test completely. "Ridiculous!" Beatrice trembled. "You can't—" "I heard your plan," I said evenly. "On the very night of our first dinner, when you and Helena thought I wasn't listening, you called me a placeholder. You said Rowan needed to marry Alexandra Castellano to save your sinking company, and that once the Castellano deal was secured, you would break off the engagement with me." The crowd erupted into loud murmurs. Rowan went pale. "Sadie, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut him off. "You betrayed me." I took out my phone. The large screen lit up. "You were still seeing Alexandra." 2 weeks ago, at Canlis." The images appeared, Rowan and Alexandra holding hands, their intimacy undeniable. Helena panicked. "This is just embezzlement?" I turned to her. "Speaking of which, Helena, would you like everyone to hear about the $1.2 million you siphoned from the company over 3 years? I nodded toward Victor. He stepped forward and handed a thick file to the car manufacturer's representative. "Complete documentation," Victor said. "Bank transfers, fake invoices, expense reports, all approved and signed by Helena Fairmont." Helena collapsed. Her husband stared at her as if she were a stranger. "As for the company's finances," I continued, my voice steady like a report, "Fairmont Automotive Group owes $4.2 million, due in 6 months. Sales are down 23%. 3 dealerships closed last year." The manufacturer's representative stood up. "We confirm this. The franchise relationship will be terminated. An official announcement will be made next week." Alton sank into a chair, his head in his hands. So this, I concluded, is the truth. This party was staged to deceive you, to make you believe the Fairmont family was still worth investing in. But it's all an illusion, built on debt, lies, and embezzlement. Beatrice stepped forward, furious. You have no right. I have every right, I said, my voice cold as steel. You used me, manipulated me, and thought I was too stupid to notice. I walked up to Rowan and removed the engagement ring from my finger. You should keep this for Alexandra, I said, placing it in his hand. If she still wants you after tonight. Sadie, I'm sorry. Rowan trembled. I really did have feelings for you. Feelings? I asked. Guilt? Shame? You should. I turned away. You know what's the most ironic thing? If they had treated me kindly, if they had seen me as a person, not a tool, I could have saved them. But they were too arrogant to recognize the value standing right in front of them. I looked at Beatrice one last time. You taught me a valuable lesson, Mrs. Fairmont. You showed me exactly the kind of person I never want to become. I walked out of the tent. No one stopped me. Behind me, chaos erupted. 1 month later, I sat in my penthouse, drinking my morning coffee, reading the news. The headline read, The Fall of the Fairmont Empire. Company files for bankruptcy. Helena Fairmont faces criminal charges. I didn't feel triumphant. Only closure. A message from Victor. Seen the news? Justice has been served. I replied, Not justice. Just consequences. Rowan tried to contact me. I didn't respond, but I did respond to another message, an invitation to lead a new technology project. That evening, I reread my grandmother's letter. You did the right thing, I whispered. The city glittered beneath my feet, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Not because of revenge, but because I finally stood up for myself. There's something no one tells you about major table-flipping moments. It isn't the feeling of victory. It isn't triumph. It's silence. After everything ends, after your name appears in the headlines, after the people who once looked down on you disappear from your world, what remains isn't applause. It's very quiet mornings. One morning like that, I woke up in my penthouse, Seattle sunlight slipping through the windows. No phone buzzing nonstop, no pleading messages, no voices pulling me back into the past. Just me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I spent the following days clearing things out. Not the apartment, but my life. I blocked Rowan's number. Not out of anger, but because he no longer had the right to occupy space in my mind. I declined every interview request, not out of fear, but because that story was finished. Some things don't need to be retold to be true. Victor stopped by one rainy afternoon. He brought 2 coffees and didn't say much. You know, he said after a moment of silence, I used to think the day the Fairmonts fell would make me feel lighter. And then? I asked. And then I realized, he smiled faintly, what I needed wasn't to see them lose. It was to see that they no longer had any power over me. I understood that. We sat by the window, watching the city lights come on. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about the next act of revenge, because there was nothing left to avenge. Everything had already paid its price. A week later, I started a new job. Not because I needed the money, but because I loved the feeling of building something. My team was young, sharp, and no one knew or cared who I was beyond the work. I liked that. I liked being judged by competence, not by a story. One afternoon, a young engineer asked me, Sade, how do you know when it's time to leave a relationship? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, when you start shrinking yourself just to stay, that's no longer a place meant for you. She nodded. I don't know if she'll use that advice. But I know I once needed to hear it much earlier. A few months passed. The Fairmont name slowly vanished from social events. The people who once circled Beatrice began circling someone else. Power doesn't disappear. It just changes hands. I didn't follow them anymore. I didn't need to. One evening, I opened the nightstand drawer again and took out my grandmother's letter. The paper was older now, the handwriting still familiar. I reread the final lines, the part I had read dozens of times. You don't need to become bigger to be loved. You only need to refuse to let anyone make you smaller. I folded the letter. Maybe one day I'll love again. Maybe I won't. I'm not in a hurry. Because this time, if someone enters my life, they'll have to enter all of me, not a version reduced to fit inside their fear. I turned off the lights. The city of Seattle still glowed outside. Life kept moving. And I realized something simple, but most important of all, I didn't lose anything in this story. I only lost the people who didn't deserve to stay, and that isn't loss. That is freedom.